Acacia Prison has been the only privatised prison in WA since its opening in 2001. But a recently leaked corrective services document suggests that the Barnett government are looking to further privatise prisons in WA. However, the recent escapes from private companies Serco's facilities raise the question, is the public safety being put at risk to save the government money?
Working among some of our state's most violent criminals is a risky job. Despite the resources boom, Colin Barnett has cut public service spending by 8%.
The Barnett government's created absolute chaos in the prison system. In the first 18 months of government, they increased the prison muster, the number of prisoners inside the prisons, by 30%. It's an extraordinary amount, and no system could sustain that sort of increase and not suffer consequences in a bad way. They've also shut one of only 2 juvenile detention facilities and crammed all the juveniles, both remand and sentenced, into one facility, and that's just been an absolute disaster.
The opposition pounced, labelling him No Comment Joe.
What do you think about Colin Barnett's dismissal of calls for a public inquiry into the Serco escapes?
Look, you've got to ask why the Barnett government cover up for Serco failure, and it's pretty clear the Barnett government are way too close to Serco. They've given $5.2 billion worth of contracts to Serco in their time in office.
This is the Serco Group. They run all 7 immigration detention centres in Australia, but they do lots more. In fact, they're probably the biggest company you've never heard of. Governments all around the world outsource to Serco. They run half of London's traffic lights, all of Dublin's, and in Ontario, Canada, they test you for your driver's licence. Serco are also the largest air traffic controllers in the world. They've got 54 towers in the US, and they control Baghdad's air traffic. They even maintain the RAF squadron the Queen flies on. All over the planet, Serco are moving people, from metros in Dubai to buses in Adelaide. And they're good at stopping people from moving too. Serco will soon be the largest operator of private prisons in the UK, and they're very efficient at it. In one prison, they increase capacity by 20%, simply by putting beds in the toilets. In another Serco prison, a 14-year-old hanged himself after being assaulted by Serco guards, the UK's youngest ever death in custody.
So what do you have to say about the supposed cost savings that you get from privatising prisons?
Well, as far as we can see, there's been a lot of price gouging by the private operators in prisoner transport in that contract, which is worth $450 million over 5 years. So that's an indication that things aren't cheaper.
In our view, in the private provision of prison services, is the need to make profit. And in making profit, there is a wish to employ less staff, to try and do things on the cheap. And that compromises safety, that compromises security, and that is neither good for the staff nor the general public.
Mark Irwin, CEO of Serco Asia Pacific, responded to the prisoner escapes with, "We regret the escape and that we failed to identify a fault in the van which allowed the incident to occur. This fault was not identified in our due diligence checks when we purchased the vehicles from the state, nor in any subsequent checks. For this, we take full responsibility." Minister for Corrective Services, Joe Francis, denied that the recently leaked Corrective Services document suggests the WA government are planning to increase the number of privatised prisons in WA in a bid to save money. He also denied any knowledge of privatisation of Banksia Hill Juvenile Detention Centre during an interview with 6PR Mornings with Gary Adshed.
A government conspiracy to privatise the Department of Corrective Services. If you listen to what people say, and there's some big government secret, it's so secret that I don't even know about it. There is no intention whatsoever to privatise Banksia Hill.
All right, well, that's fairly emphatic. We'll play that one back if it happens. Just remember that.
Well,
Just remember that.
Well, if there's an agenda to privatise Banksia Hill, no one's told me it.
All right.
Gary Adshed, morning show presenter for 6PR, states that every now and then journalists get hold of a document that ends speculation, cancels out any guesswork, and provides undeniable proof of what is being considered or acted on at the very highest levels of government.
We've recently seen that special purpose transfers and escorts are being carried out by Serco at enormous cost. They're charging $28,000 to move somebody from Broome to Perth. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that it can be done at a much lower cost, and in fact the public sector have been able to carry out exactly the same escort for around $3,500.
Serco just keep getting bigger. Since 1994, they've grown by 1,200%. How have they been so successful? CEO Chris Hyman puts his success with Serco down to listening to God.
it's not very not very difficult to be cleverer than me. I know a host of my friends were way cleverer and didn't end up with the life I had. And God saw that through. They didn't have God.
It's only now it's been discovered that the invoices were put in overcharging for people who were dead, people who were overseas, people who had been returned to prisons, and people who were out and about on whom there was no tag, but the MOJ, us taxpayers, had been billed for that.
Why has it taken a year for you to look again at this company? They seem to be running rings around you.
No, they're not.
Private operators have got to make their profits somehow. And inside prisons, the way that seems to be is they have fewer staff, fewer prisoners, fewer prison officers as a ratio to prisoners. And that's true at Acacia, for instance, as compared to a publicly operated prison. And that means there's more likelihood of an incident, and the individuals that are operating in that system, the prison officers operating in those conditions, are encountering very high levels of stress, and they feel more threatened.
I think prison officers deserve the right, when they look after these people for society, to be able to expect in the morning to come home safe at night. And when you overcrowd a prison, you make that much more difficult. It's fairly common for prison officers to be the subject of punches, kicks, to be thrown against the door, for non-compliant prison officers to bite their lips so that they bleed and then spit the blood in their face. They do that because prisoners often, unfortunately, have Hep C, Hep B or HIV, and they know therefore that their blood in effect is a weapon. Those are the sorts of things that prison officers face on a daily basis.
In Australia, Serco have a presence on every military base, run every immigration detention centre, 2 prisons, cross-country trains like the Indian Pacific and the GAN, and they're bidding on more contracts right now, including one to run prisons across New South Wales. So, even if you don't know their name, chances are you're caught in their web. Serco, bringing service to life.
When you look back over the history of privatisation, it is not just one individual instance. You can see the tragic death of Aboriginal elder Mr Ward, the largest single escape from the prison system of WA, the Supreme Court escape. These all took place under the watch of the private prison provider. We've been told in the past that private provision is better in quality. Anybody who's looked at any of the media for the last 6 to 7 weeks would be scratching their head and asking themselves, how has anybody come to the conclusion that the private provision of these services is better? And since we don't believe that either it's any cheaper either, I cannot see any good reason why we don't return it to the public sector. The public sector has done a good job for 80 years in providing this service. I don't know why it's not perfectly capable of providing it well and efficiently today.
It is now just a matter of waiting for our government to publicly release their plans for the prison system. Catherine Croston, reporting for Undercurrent.